Good evening, and welcome to another storytelling session. I'm your storyteller, ready to take you on a journey that will ease your mind and help you sleep soundly. Don't forget to like and subscribe before we start. Now, relax, and let the gentle sounds of nature carry you away. It was late afternoon when the sun dipped behind the looming trees, casting long shadows over the thick forest surrounding the small ranger station. The air was dense, humid, clinging to the skin as though the forest itself were alive, breathing with the heavy weight of something forgotten. This was the place where Warren had spent countless days, wandering the familiar trails, until that evening when everything changed. Warren had just finished his usual patrol through the woods, nothing out of the ordinary as he checked the routes. He'd been working as a park ranger for years now, and had seen every wild animal the forest could throw at him. But this particular evening felt different. The silence in the woods was unsettling, too still, and the deepening twilight cast an ominous glow on the trees. As he finished his shift, his supervisor, Hank, approached him, his face pale and his brow furrowed with concern. "Warren," Hank said in a low voice, "I need a favor. We're short-staffed tonight, and Mike's not feeling well. Any chance you can cover the night patrol? We'll make it up to you tomorrow." Warren sighed. He had hoped for a quiet evening, but with the park understaffed, it wasn't a choice. "Sure, Hank, I'll take care of it." With that, he loaded up his patrol vehicle with the essentials: a flashlight, first aid kit, a thermos of coffee, and a radio. The sun was setting as he made his way into the woods again, the silence thickening as the familiar paths seemed to twist and stretch into the unknown. The air was unnaturally still, and every crackling leaf underfoot felt louder than it should have been. Warren couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the oppressive humidity or the quiet that felt suffocating. It was something deeper in Oz, crawling under his skin. This wasn't just the woods. This was a warning. He decided to stop for a break near Brandywine Falls, a familiar spot he often used to gather his thoughts during patrols. The waterfall's roar filled the air, providing a sense of comfort until he heard it. A low growl, barely audible over the rush of water. At first, he dismissed it as an animal, but then the growl came again, closer this time, unmistakably real. He gripped his flashlight, his fingers tightening as his heart began to race. His training told him to stay calm, but instinct told him something was wrong. "Hello?" Warren called out, his voice echoing through the trees. "Is anyone out there?" There was no answer, just the growl. And then it stopped. His flashlight swept across the tree line, revealing only shadows and the rustling of leaves in the evening breeze. But then, for a brief moment, something caught his eye-too glowing eyes, staring back at him, too high off the ground and far too large to belong to any animal he knew. The creature vanished before Warren could react. His pulse quickened as the eerie silence returned. "Probably just my imagination," Warren muttered, though deep down, he knew it wasn't. Whatever it was out there, watching him, and it was only a matter of time before it made its move. Warren couldn't shake the image of those glowing eyes, even as he walked along the trail. The darkness seemed to press in closer, the trees whispering their secrets in the wind. His flashlight bobbed in front of him, casting long, unsettling shadows. He tried to convince himself that it was just a trick of the light, or some wild animal perhaps, a bear or a large cat, but something about it felt wrong. The growl, the eyes. He reached for his radio, the static crackling as he held it close to his mouth. "Hank, you there?" His voice sounded too small, too unsure in the overwhelming silence of the woods. Nothing. The radio remained silent, offering no comfort, no response. He tried again, pressing the button longer this time, but again, there was nothing. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath, a chill creeping over him. The station wasn't that far from here, and Mike was probably still sick, not far from the bunkhouse. But if the radio wasn't working, It meant something had interfered. And when you're alone in the woods, interference wasn't always a mechanical issue. He pushed forward, his feet heavy as the unease in the air grew thicker. The path was familiar. He had walked it 100 times, but tonight, every crack of a branch, every rustle of the leaves felt like a threat. As he reached the edge of a clearing, he saw something that made his blood run cold. There, in the distance, stood a figure, tall and indistinct, blending with the dark trees behind it. It was too far to make out clearly, but there was no mistaking the way it moved slowly, unnaturally, as if it wasn't entirely human. "Hello," Warren called again, his voice barely a whisper, barely steady enough to break the tension hanging in the air. "Is someone there?" The figure didn't move. For a moment, Warren thought about turning around, heading back toward the station, but the figure didn't move, and somehow, that was worse. It was as if it was waiting for him to make the first move. His flashlight flickered as if the battery were dying, though he had checked it just before he left. Suddenly, a low groan echoed from somewhere behind the trees, like the wind through old timber. It was the same growl, closer now, and this time, it didn't stop. The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge him, but Warren felt its presence, pressing into him like the weight of an old storm. He stepped back, hand gripping his flashlight tighter, trying to steady his breath. But the growl was becoming louder, angrier. He couldn't see where it was coming from, but he could feel the dead, guttural sound that vibrated through his chest. Whatever it wasn't alone. "Warren, it's just a bear. Just a bear," he muttered, shaking his head, trying to calm himself. He backed away slowly, his foot catching on a hidden rock as he stumbled. The figure seemed to remain still, unmoving, a silhouette against the tree line, as though waiting for something. "Just a bear," he repeated, but the growl was too clear, too unnatural. Suddenly, the ground beneath his feet shook. It wasn't an earthquake. It was something different, something deliberate. The air around him felt electric, charged, as though something primal, something older than the forest itself, was rising from the earth. Before Warren could react, the figure in the clearing moved fast. Faster than a person could, a blur of darkness that split the air with a horrifying screech. His flashlight flickered, and in that moment of darkness, he saw a mass of shadows and unnatural limbs, far too large, too twisted to be human. It lunged. Warren barely had time to react before the thing was on him. Its claws long and sharp as obsidian slashed through the air, catching the edge of his jacket and sending him tumbling to the ground. He scrambled, desperate, rolling just out of reach as the creature snapped its jaws mere inches from his face. His heart pounded in his chest as he pushed himself up, feet sliding in the loose dirt. The growl was deafening now, mixed with a horrible screech that made his teeth rattle. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to run. Warren didn't need any more encouragement. He bolted, sprinting down the trail, his breath ragged and shallow, his legs burning from the sudden exertion. Behind him, the creature was relentless, its feet slamming against the earth, the branches overhead groaning as it swiped at anything in its path. He dared not look back, but he could hear its breath, ragged and deep. Each step a thunderous crash that sent tremors through the forest. The darkness around him seemed to grow heavier with each passing second, the trees closing in on the path, blocking any hope of escape. His only thought was to get back to the station, to the safety of the lights. But even as he ran, he could feel the forest itself turning against him. The wind howled, the branches above him shook violently, and the shadows seemed to move alive, shifting, reaching for him. He rounded a bend in the path and nearly collided with someone. "Mike," Warren gasped, barely able to catch his breath. But the figure wasn't Mike. It was the Watcher. The tall, cloaked figure stood in the middle of the path, glowing eyes fixed on Warren. It wasn't Mike. It wasn't human. and it didn't speak. Before Warren could react, the creature behind him roared. The watcher stepped forward, its cloak swirling like smoke as it raised its hand. A sharp, sudden crack of energy hit the air, sending a pulse of light that split the trees. The creature stopped, its growl turning into a snarl as it was pushed back by the force. "Go," the watcher commanded, in a voice like the wind itself, a cold whisper that seemed to vibrate the air. "Run. The veil is thinning, but you are not alone." Warren didn't question. He ran, not daring to look back, the creature's screeches fading behind him as he rushed toward the station, where Hank and Mike were waiting, the truth of what was happening only beginning to unfold. Warren didn't stop running. His lungs burned, his legs threatened to give out under him, but his mind refused to let him slow down. He could feel the air around him growing colder, the dark press of the trees on either side of him as the night deepened. His feet hit the dirt path with desperate urgency, the light of the ranger station still a distant glow in the distance. Behind him, the growl faded for a moment, but the silence was far worse. It was like the forest had gone still, waiting, holding its breath. The watcher's warning had been clear. The veil was thinning. He didn't know what that meant. Not yet, but he knew it wasn't good. And now, he had to get back to the station, to warn Hank and Mike. If the creatures weren't the true threat, if it was something worse, he needed answers. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath, his hand grasping for the radio once more. But it remained silent, completely dead, as if it had never worked at all. His mind spun with questions. What was the watcher? What did they want? And why did the forest feel so wrong? The weight of the tension in the air felt like a heavy, invisible hand pressing down on his chest. Every rustling leaf, every snapping branch, set his nerves alight with the fear of something unseen, something waiting. He could see the station now, its lights flickering weakly through the trees ahead. His feet were slamming against the trail, each step bringing him closer, but the feeling of being pursued, of being watched, gnawed at him relentlessly. And then he heard it, a high-pitched screech, then another. A chorus of growls and low, animalistic noises rising from the shadows behind him. Warren dared not turn around, but he could feel the ground vibrating with each step of whatever was chasing him. It wasn't just one creature anymore. It was more. They were coming for him. With every ounce of energy he had left, he pushed himself harder, faster. He was almost there. The station. Safety. The light that he thought would protect him now felt distant, unattainable. His breath came in short gasps, and then a sharp, painful tug. Warren was jerked backward, thrown off his feet. His stomach lurched as his body slammed to the ground. He rolled, trying to get his bearings, but there was something pulling at his legs, dragging him toward the trees. A creature? Its claws scraped against his skin, sharp and relentless. Its growl echoed through his head, reverberating in his skull as it yanked him into the brush. His flashlight flew from his hand, its beam bouncing uselessly against the trees before dying in the darkness. He fought back with everything he had, kicking, scratching, clawing at the ground to stop its pull. His hands found a rock, and with a wild swing, he managed to strike the creature across its face. It recoiled, its grip loosening, and for a split second, Warren had the freedom to scramble away. But there was no time to celebrate. The creature was already back on him, slamming him into the ground again. This time, he couldn't move, as the weight of its body pinned him down. The air was thick with the smell of decay, the stench of wet fur and rot. The creature's face loomed above him, its eyes gleaming with hunger, its mouth opening wider than should have been possible. Warren's heartbeat thundered in his ears. He couldn't let it get him. He couldn't let the forest win. Out of nowhere, a flash of light, a blinding burst of energy. The creature screeched, a horrific, inhuman sound that split the air. It staggered back, releasing Warren, who scrambled to his feet, his eyes wide in disbelief. Standing in front of him was the Watcher, its form now more defined, its glowing eyes steady and piercing in the night. The creature growled, furious, as it writhed in the light, but it was being held back. The Watcher raised a hand, and the energy around them intensified, shimmering like a wave of pure force. "This is not your fight," the Watcher said, its voice commanding and deep, like the earth itself speaking. "The darkness is beyond you. You must go." Warren didn't hesitate. His legs finally moved, his body obeying his desperate will as he ran past the Watcher and back toward the station. He could feel the heat of the creature's glare still burning into his back, but when he glanced over his shoulder, the Watcher had already disappeared into the trees, the creature retreating with a scream. Warren didn't stop until he reached the station. He burst through the door, his chest heaving with labored breaths, his face flushed with panic. Hank and Mike were there, both standing at the small desk, looking up in surprise. "Warren," Hank called out, rushing toward him. "What happened?" Warren didn't answer immediately. He was still catching his breath, trying to steady himself. He felt like he had run through hell. "The creatures," Warren said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's worse than we thought. There's something more, and we're not ready for it." Mike stepped forward, his face hardening. "What do you mean? What happened out there?" "There's something in the woods," Warren continued, his voice shaking. "It's not just the creatures. The Watchers, those things, they're controlling it all. And there's something else, something worse, lurking behind the veil. The darkness, it's coming for us." "Darren, calm down," Hank said, stepping closer, his hand on Warren's shoulder. "You're not making sense." Warren shook his head. "You don't get it. The darkness. The Watchers, they're part of something older than anything we've seen. They want to tear down the veil, the one thing that's keeping everything in check. If we don't act fast, it'll be too late. We need to find the other Watchers who can help us." Hank and Mike exchanged a look, but there was no denying the truth that hung in the air. Something had changed in the woods, something ancient and dangerous. They were no longer just protectors of the land. They were standing between the earth and an unknown force. Mike nodded. "Let's figure this out, together." The room was thick with tension, the weight of Warren's words hanging in the air like a storm waiting to break. Hank and Mike stood still, processing everything that Warren had said, each of them grappling with the sudden weight of the unknown. The creatures weren't the only threat. It was the Watchers, the darkness, the valley was all interconnected, and they were standing on the edge of something far worse than they had ever imagined. Mike was the first to speak, his voice steady, despite the fear in his eyes. "What do we do now? How do we find the others? And more importantly, how do we stop this?" Warren glanced out the window, his gaze distant. The forest beyond was as still as death, the night pressing in, suffocating. The trees twisted and unnatural, like sentinels watching their every move. The fog had thickened again, rolling in from the trees like a living thing. "We start by finding the other Watchers," Warren said, his voice low but filled with determination. "There are more of us, scattered across the country. They've been hiding for years, but now they're the only ones who can help us. We can't fight this alone. The veil is weakening, and if we don't act soon, the darkness will break through. The Watchers are the key." Hank ran a hand through his hair, frustration creeping into his expression. "We don't know where they are. Hell, we barely understand what's happening here. The Watchers are the ones who control the veil, but what are they really? What if we're making a mistake trusting them?" Warren turned to face Hank, his eyes sharp and filled with an urgency that Hank had never seen before. "You saw what happened out there. We're running out of time. If the veil falls, it's over. The creatures won't be the worst of it. The real horror is what's behind the veil, the things that have been waiting for centuries. The Watchers are the only ones who know how to stop it." Mike, who had been quietly absorbing the conversation, finally spoke up. "So, we find these watchers. But how? And where do we even start? Warren exhaled sharply. We start with the old trails, the ones that connect the watchers. They've been hidden in plain sight, all over the country. We just need to follow the signs, the markings they left behind. We find them, and we form an alliance. That's the only way we stand a chance. He moved to the small map pinned to the wall, tracing his finger along several paths that cut through the country's wilderness. There were no markings, no clear directions. Just a trail that stretched between the woods, the mountains, and the old places. Warren knew the watchers had left these paths long ago, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to follow. We're going after them, Warren said, determination creeping into his voice. Tonight, the night air was sharp and cold as Warren, Hank, and Mike prepared for their journey. The station was quiet, the sounds of the forest pressing against the thin walls like a distant whisper. The growl of the creatures was gone for now, but the tension in the air was palpable. The darkness was patient, waiting for them to slip up. Warren had gathered what little gear they would need, a few days' worth of supplies, flashlights, maps, and radios, though he didn't know how reliable they would be in the wilderness. The only thing that was certain was the path they had to follow. This is it, Warren said, glancing back at Hank and Mike. Once we leave, there's no turning back. We don't know what we'll find, but we have to trust each other. The watchers are out there, and they're the only ones who can help us. Hank nodded, his face grim. I've got your back, no matter what. Mike, on the other hand, looked uneasy. I don't like this, Warren. We don't know what we're dealing with. There's something off about all of this. The watchers, the creatures, the darkness. It feels like we're walking straight into something we can't control. Warren met his gaze, trying to offer a reassuring smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. We don't have a choice. We stop this now, or it's over. With that, the three of them set out into the woods, following the paths that Warren had traced on the map. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, leaving them to navigate by the dim glow of their flashlights. The air was damp, and the forest felt heavier with each step they took. The silence in the woods was unnerving. There were no sounds of wildlife, no chirping birds or rustling animals. The forest felt abandoned, dead. Even only the sound of their footsteps broke the stillness. As they moved deeper into the woods, the trees began to change. The trunks grew thicker, twisted in unnatural shapes, their branches curling like claws. The path wound through dense underbrush, the darkness seeming to close in on them, suffocating the air around them. And then, ahead, something caught Warren's eye. A symbol carved into the bark of a tree. It was faint, almost faded with time, but unmistakable. The symbol of the Watchers. It was the same mark that had been on the trees near the clearing. The same symbol the Watcher had worn on their cloak. This is it, Warren said, his voice barely above a whisper. We're close. They continued along the path, each step taking them further from the safety of the station and deeper into the unknown. The trees closed in tighter, their branches reaching for them like a web. Warren's flashlight flickered, casting strange shadows that seemed to move on their own. And then, from ahead, came a sound, a low, rumbling growl. It wasn't the creature they had encountered earlier. This growl was something different, deeper, older, and much more dangerous. The sound reverberated through the forest, vibrating in their bones. They stopped, frozen in place. The sound came again, louder this time. And then, from the shadows, something stepped into the light. A figure, tall and cloaked in darkness. It stood still, its face hidden beneath a hood, its form almost blending with the shadows of the trees. Who are you? Warren called, his voice steady, though the fear was evident in his eyes. The figure didn't answer immediately. It simply stood there, watching them, and then, in a voice that sounded like the rustling of dry leaves, It spoke. "You've come too far," the figure said, its voice low and grave. "You shouldn't have followed the path. You've awakened what should stay hidden." The figure's presence seemed to fill the air, its very being absorbing the light from their flashlights, making the darkness feel even more oppressive. Warren, Hank, and Mike stood frozen, the weight of the Watcher's words hanging in the air like a suffocating fog. The growl they had heard earlier still echoed in the distance, but now there was something more terrifying. Silence. Dead silence. The figure shifted slightly, its form still cloaked in shadow, but there was a strange, unnatural stillness in the air, as if the forest had stopped breathing. Warren felt his heart hammer in his chest, his instincts screaming at him to run, but his feet felt rooted to the ground. I don't understand," Warren said, his voice strained. "We came to find the Watchers, to stop whatever's happening." The figure's glowing eyes narrowed, and it tilted its head slightly. "You have already found us," it replied in a voice like gravel scraping against stone, "but not the way you intended." "What do you mean?" Hank asked, his voice barely above a whisper, as though speaking too loudly might provoke something worse. The figure stepped forward, its cloak swaying like smoke in the dark. "The Watchers are not your allies. Not anymore. You have crossed into a place where the veil has thinned. The creatures you fear, the darkness that stalks you, it is not the end. It is merely the beginning." Warren swallowed hard, dread pooling in his stomach. "The veil? You're talking about the barrier between worlds, between us and whatever's beyond." The Watcher nodded slowly. "The veil was never meant to last. It has weakened, and now the darkness seeps through. You are part of it now, part of the fate that has been set in motion." Warren felt his breath catch in his throat. "No, that can't be. He was interrupted by the sound of growls again, louder, closer this time. They were coming from all sides, and as the growls drew nearer, so did the shadows. The trees around them seemed to grow even darker, the air thicker. The creatures were closing in. The Watcher raised a hand, a single motion that stilled the air around them. "You think you can stop this? You think you can stop the darkness that is already here? The creatures, the forest, even you, all of it is part of what is coming. You have awakened it." Warren's heart raced as the reality of the Watcher's words settled in. They hadn't come to stop anything. They had come to walk right into the heart of it. The Watchers. Warren's voice faltered. "You were meant to protect the veil, to keep the darkness out." The Watcher's eyes gleamed coldly. "You misunderstand. We are not here to protect. We are here to watch. And now, you have disturbed that balance. The darkness was always meant to return. The question now is, will you embrace it or be consumed by it?" Before Warren could respond, the forest erupted in chaos. From the shadows came creatures, twisted figures that seemed to crawl from the very earth itself. Their eyes gleamed with malice, their bodies like dark silhouettes barely visible against the tree trunks. Their forms too unnatural to be anything that should exist in the natural world. They moved with unnatural speed, silent and predatory. "Run," Hank shouted, grabbing Warren's arm and pulling him away from the clearing. But the Watcher didn't move. It stood still, as though unaffected by the growing chaos around them. It was as if it had become part of the forest itself. Warren tried to break free from Hank's grip. "We can't just leave it like this," he shouted. "We have to stop them." "The Watcher told you the truth, Warren," Hank said urgently, his eyes wild with panic. "We need to get to safety. We can't fight this. Not like this. Not now." Warren hesitated, staring back at the Watcher, whose cold eyes followed them as though it were waiting for something. "But what? Please, just run," Mike shouted, pulling Warren away. The three of them turned and ran, their breath ragged, legs pumping through the thick underbrush. But the growls were closing in, the creatures behind them gaining ground. Each step felt like a race against time. The station was still far ahead, but the creatures were relentless. their screeches echoing through the trees, forcing them to move faster. Suddenly, there was a sharp pain in Warren's side. He stumbled, his foot catching on a hidden root, and he crashed to the ground. Pain flared through his body, and when he looked up, one of the creatures was right on top of him. It was a grotesque thing. It was a grotesque thing, a mixture of animal and something worse. Its teeth bared in a snarl. Its body was twisted, its limbs far too long, stretching unnaturally as it reached for him. Warren reached for his flashlight, his hands shaking as he grabbed it and swung it at the creature's head. The impact made it recoil, but the thing didn't go down. Instead, it hissed and lunged again. Before Warren could react, there was another flash of light. The creature screamed, a high-pitched sound that sent a shiver down his spine, and suddenly it was gone, vanished back into the shadows like it had never been there. He scrambled to his feet, his head spinning, and looked up to see the Watcher standing in the clearing, its hand raised. "I told you," the Watcher said, its voice cool and detached. "You cannot stop what has already been set in motion." The Watcher's eyes gleamed, but this time, there was something different about Ita, deeper, darker knowledge that made Warren's blood run cold. And then, just as suddenly as the creatures had appeared, the forest fell silent again. Warren, Hank, and Mike arrived at the station with no more time to waste. They were breathless, their faces pale from fear and exhaustion. The doors slammed shut behind them, the walls of the station offering little comfort as they tried to regroup. The air inside was thick with tension. Hank collapsed into a chair, his hands trembling as he wiped his brow. "We can't run from this," Warren said, his voice tight. "The Watcher is right. We've disturbed something, and now it's after us. We're part of it." "What are we supposed to do?" Mike asked, pacing back and forth. "How can we fight this?" Warren looked toward the dark forest outside, the heavy fog now rolling across the ground like a thick blanket. "We don't fight it. We survive it, and we stop it before it takes everything." The station felt cold now, the safety they had once believed it offered, now gone. They were no longer safe here, not with the creatures growing stronger and the veil weakening. "The Watcher told us to run," Hank said, his voice low. "Maybe that's the only thing we can do." "No," Warren said firmly. "We can't run anymore. It's time to fight back." But the question remained, how? The darkness had returned, and only the Watchers knew the truth of how to stop it. But with every passing moment, it was getting harder to tell what was real and what was a shadow of the nightmare that had been unleashed. The station was alive with the sound of their rapid breaths as they tried to regroup. Warren paced back and forth, his mind racing, but there was little he could focus on that made sense. The forest outside had become a living nightmare, its silence more terrifying than any growl or screech they had heard before. The air was thick, suffocating, as if the very trees were closing in on them, waiting to swallow them whole. Mike stood by the window, peering through the blinds. "I don't see anything, but I can feel it. The forest feels different. It's like it's holding its breath, waiting for something." Warren nodded, the unease in his stomach growing. "The creatures, the Watchers, they're all part of this. It's like they've been waiting for us to make a mistake, to let the veil fall. And now that we have, there's no going back." Hank shifted in his chair, rubbing his forehead. "I don't understand it, Warren. You say the Watchers are trying to stop the darkness, but then they tell you we've awakened it. Are they helping us, or not?" Warren turned to face Hank, his eyes hardening. "I don't know, but the Watcher said something that stuck with me. They said we've disturbed the balance, and now the creatures aren't just hunting us, they're drawn to us. We're the key." "Key to what?" Mike asked, his voice tight with fear. "A key to what?" "The key to what's beyond the veil," Warren muttered, his voice dark. "The Watchers are supposed to protect the boundary, but they've been watching, waiting for the right moment to tear it down. And we've given them that moment. We've opened the door." A long silence stretched across the room, the only sound the hum of the old lights above them. It was like the station itself was holding its breath, the walls closing in around them. "We need to find out how to stop this," Warren said, breaking the silence. "We need answers, and we can't stay here any longer. It's only a matter of time before whatever's out there figures out we're here." Hank stood up, his posture tense. "You're right. But where do we go? We're in the middle of nowhere." "Not quite nowhere," Mike said, glancing at the map on the wall. "There's an old ranger outpost about 15 miles north. It was abandoned years ago, but it's got a radio tower. We could try to reach someone for help." Warren nodded. "We'll go there, but we have to move fast. If the creatures aren't hunting us now, they will be soon." They packed what little they could, grabbing their gear and their radios. Although Warren didn't hold much hope for those working. As they made their way toward the door, the station felt like a prison, the weight of the forest pressing against the walls. Before they stepped outside, Warren stopped, looking back at the dimly lit interior. "This is it," he whispered to himself. "We're either going to make it, or we're not." The air outside had grown even colder, the fog thick and swirling like a living thing, making it hard to see beyond a few feet in front of them. They moved quickly, the path leading them into the heart of the woods, away from the station, and toward the abandoned outpost. The trees around them seemed to close in, their twisted limbs reaching out like fingers. The sound of creaking branches cutting through the thick silence. It was unnerving. The forest had always felt like a sanctuary to Warren, a place where he could clear his mind and feel at home. But now, it felt like it was alive, malevolent, watching their every move. "We need to keep moving," Warren said, his voice steady, though he could feel his pulse quicken with each step. The air felt heavier, thick with an unnatural presence. Mike glanced over his shoulder. "We're being followed. I can feel it." "I know," Warren muttered, his eyes scanning the trees. He could feel the same thing, the growing sense of being watched, the sensation that the forest was closing in on them, trapping them. And then, there it was, again, the low growl, the familiar sound of something hunting them. Warren's heart skipped a beat. "It's too close," Hank whispered, pulling his flashlight from his belt and casting a quick beam into the woods. "What the hell is that?" At first, Warren didn't see anything, but then, through the mist, two glowing eyes flickered in the distance. They were too high off the ground to be a bear or a mountain lion. They blinked, and then just as quickly the eyes vanished into the trees. "It's not just one," Warren muttered, his voice tight with realization. "It's a pack. They're circling us." Mike's face paled. "How do we fight them? How do we stop this?" "We can't," Warren said quietly. "Not like this. We have to keep moving." But before they could move, there was a rustling from behind them, a loud snap of a branch breaking, and then the growl again, closer this time, unmistakable. Something was coming for them. They sprinted forward, adrenaline fueling their legs as they ran through the dense trees. The fog thickened around them, obscuring their vision, making the world feel like a nightmare they couldn't escape. They were running blind, their only guide the sound of the growling creatures behind them. And then there was a sound sharp, distinct, and terrifying, a roar so loud that it rattled the very ground beneath their feet. It wasn't a creature of flesh and bone. It was something older, something darker. The trees shook, and the ground seemed to tremble beneath their feet. The very air felt like it was closing in on them. A massive figure appeared ahead, its silhouette dark against the fog, towering above the trees. It wasn't like the creatures. This was something ancient, something that made the forest itself seem small in comparison. The creature's eyes burned like the very embers of a fire long forgotten, the Watcher. The air had thickened in the woods, an unnatural stillness creeping over the landscape like a blanket. The massive form of the Watcher stood before them, casting an imposing shadow against the dim, foggy light. The branches of the trees seemed to sway unnaturally, as though they were reacting to the Watcher's presence shifting, reaching for something beyond their control. Warren's heart pounded in his chest, the reality of their situation settling in with the weight of the creature before them. This wasn't the same forest he had known his entire life. It wasn't even the same world anymore. Whatever the Watcher was, it wasn't just a being, it was the embodiment of the forest's dark power, an ancient force older than the very trees that surrounded them. Who are you? Warren's voice cracked, a mix of fear and confusion. The questions flooded his mind, but the answer seemed just beyond his reach. The Watcher tilted its head slightly, its eyes glowing with an eerie, malevolent light. It was like staring into the heart of a dying star, cold, distant, and infinitely dangerous. Its voice came low, resonating in the air around them, vibrating through the very ground they stood on. "You've already met the creatures," the Watcher said, its voice smooth, almost soothing. "Despite the underlying threat, you've seen their hunger, their desperation to break free, but they are nothing compared to what lies beyond the veil." Warren's breath caught in his throat. "What do you mean by beyond the veil?" "The veil," the Watcher continued, its eyes narrowing. "The thin barrier that separates your world from the one that waits just beyond it. The one that always waits. The creatures are only the beginning. The real horror, the true danger lies in the darkness beyond." Mike stepped forward, his fists clenched. "You're talking about something else. Something worse than the creatures. What is it? What are you trying to tell us?" The Watcher didn't flinch, its gaze cold and calculating. "The darkness is not a force you can fight. It is a force that has always been here, always waiting, buried beneath the earth, beneath the very ground you walk upon. It is in the roots of the trees, in the wind that whispers through the branches. The creatures you've seen, the ones that stalk the woods, they are but extensions of it, harbingers of what's to come." Warren's legs felt like lead. The reality of the Watcher's words hit him harder than anything he had faced so far. The creatures, the things they had seen, the growls, the eyes in the dark, were just the tip of the iceberg. What lay beneath was far worse. "We've disturbed something," Warren said, his voice barely above a whisper, more to himself than anyone else. "We've opened the door, and now it's coming for us." The Watcher nodded, but its expression didn't change. The veil was never meant to last. It has always been fragile, a barrier created to keep what lies beneath sealed away. But over time, it weakens, it deteriorates, and now, with the barrier thinning, the darkness has begun to leak through. The ground beneath them trembled. Warren felt it in his chest, a deep vibration that made his bones ache. Something, somewhere in the forest, was stirring. "Where are the other Watchers?" Hank demanded. What are we supposed to do?" "You've said enough. Now tell us how we stop this." The Watcher's gaze flickered toward Hank, its expression unreadable. "You cannot stop what has already been set in motion. The darkness is already here, and it cannot be undone. You, like the creatures, are merely pawns in a game that has been played for eons. But there is one thing you can do. You can decide who survives this." "What does that mean?" Mike asked, his voice shaking with frustration. "What do you want from us?" The Watcher's face softened for a brief moment, a hint of something resembling sorrow in its glowing eyes. "You have come far, but you will go no further. You are too late." Before anyone could respond, the trees around them began to shake violently. The forest groaned as though it were alive, the air thick with a sense of something monstrous, something ancient that was stirring from its slumber. The Watcher raised a hand, the air crackling with energy. "Run," the Watcher said, its voice harsh now, filled with urgency. "The creatures are not what you should fear. The true enemy is what lies beneath. The darkness has already awoken, and now it is coming." Warren didn't need any further warning. The Watcher's words had sunk in deeper than any growl or screech he had heard before. The forest itself was alive with something far worse than he could have imagined, and now that presence was drawing closer. Before they could react, the shadows around them seemed to move, almost as if the trees themselves were bending and twisting, their branches reaching for them. The growls, the terrible guttural growls, filled the air once more, louder, closer. Warren turned to run, but his legs felt like they were moving through molasses. The world around him blurred as panic surged through his chest. He could hear the creatures, more of them now, closing in. "Move," Warren shouted, grabbing Hank and Mike's arms, dragging them forward as they sprinted through the dense underbrush, the darkness seeming to devour the trail behind them. Every step felt like it was taking them deeper into the abyss, and the sound of the creatures, too many to count, echoed behind them, their snarls growing more insistent, more desperate. They burst through the trees, and ahead, through the fog, Warren saw the abandoned ranger outpost. The building looked like a hollow shell, its windows dark and broken, the door half ajar, as if it had been waiting for them. "Keep running," Warren urged, his voice hoarse, barely able to push through the fear. As they reached the outpost, the growling stopped abruptly. The forest seemed to fall silent, as though it were holding its breath. Warren spun around, trying to catch his breath, but there was nothing there, no creatures, no shadows, just the eerie stillness of the night. He felt a chill run down his spine, his mind racing. Where had they gone? Had they been lured into a trap? And then he heard it, a whisper, low and menacing. It came from behind him, from the trees. "Welcome to the end of the world, Warren." He turned, his heart in his throat, but the figure that emerged from the mist wasn't just any creature. It was the Watcher, its form flickering like smoke in the wind, its eyes burning like embers, its voice echoing in his mind. "The veil has failed," the Watcher said, its voice resonating in the air. "And now, you will learn what happens when the darkness is set free." The Watcher's words hung in the air, thick with an undeniable finality. "The veil has failed," it repeated, its voice no longer a whisper, but a resounding declaration, as if the very fabric of reality itself had just been torn apart. Warren's breath caught in his chest. His pulse was erratic, and his limbs felt like stone, frozen in place by the weight of the Watcher's words. He couldn't understand, couldn't comprehend what the Watcher meant by "the veil has failed." But before he could voice his confusion, the Watcher's eyes glowed brighter, and the very air around them seemed to thrum with a palpable force. Mike stepped forward, his hand trembling as he reached for Warren. "What does that mean? What happens now?" The Watcher didn't answer immediately. Instead, it raised one hand slowly, as though it were drawing something from the very air. Something ancient, something that had been buried for centuries. The ground beneath their feet trembled once more. A low, rumbling growl filled the forest, but it wasn't coming from any creature. This sound, this vibration came from something deeper, from something ancient, a force too immense for them to even begin to understand. The trees around them swayed as if they were alive, groaning under the weight of an unseen presence, as though the forest itself was awakening from a long slumber. The veil was never meant to be permanent. The Watcher spoke again, its voice echoing with a strange resonance that seemed to come from every direction. It was a thin barrier, a false shield against what lies beyond, a prison to keep the darkness contained. But nothing lasts forever. The darkness was always waiting. Now, it has breached the wall. Warren could feel it, feel the energy shifting in the air, pressing against him, smothering him. The very world around them seemed to grow darker, the fog swirling thicker, the trees twisting and bending as though they were being pulled by some invisible force. The creatures, they are nothing, the Watcher continued, its voice filled with a strange sorrow. They are merely the first wave, the messengers of what's to come. What's been set in motion can never be undone. A sudden, horrific sound split the air, a scream of such intensity it rattled the bones. It wasn't the growl of the creatures. It was deeper, more It was a sound that echoed through the trees, shaking the ground beneath their feet. What the hell is that? Hank gasped, his eyes wide with fear as he scanned the darkness around them. Warren's voice was low, barely above a whisper. It's coming. As if answering his words, the forest exploded into chaos. The trees shook violently, the ground cracked open, and from the depths of the earth, something stirred. A massive shadow emerged from the dark fog, something too large to be a creature, too ancient to be a mere beast. The air grew colder, the temperature dropping so rapidly that Warren could see his breath forming in the air. The mist around them twisted, and in its midst, a figure emerged, a towering silhouette, its form shifting like smoke, its eyes glowing with an unnatural fire. It was the darkness. It was the thing that had been trapped behind the veil, the force that had been held at bay for centuries, and now it was free. The Watcher stepped back, its form flickering as though it were uncertain of what was happening. This is the true threat. This is what you've awakened. Warren's heart hammered in his chest as the figure approached. It wasn't a creature. It wasn't a being of flesh. It was something older, something incomprehensible, a force that bent the laws of reality itself. It moved like a storm, its presence warping the very air, its power pressing down on them like a heavy weight. And then it spoke. It didn't use words, not as they understood them. The sound filled their minds, a deep, resonating presence that made their skulls ache. You have broken the boundary, it whispered, its voice 1,000 voices, an echo of the ancient darkness. You have unleashed the abyss, and now you will witness its fury. Warren took a step back, but it was already too late. The darkness surged forward, wrapping around him, around them. The trees began to bend and break under the force of the pressure, their trunks splintering like matchsticks. The earth itself seemed to shift, the ground cracking open with a deafening roar. The Watcher stepped forward, raising its hand. A burst of energy erupted from its palm, blinding in its intensity. But the darkness didn't flinch. It absorbed the energy, as if it were nothing more than a passing breeze. No, you cannot stop it, the Watcher said, its voice filled with an odd mixture of resignation and terror. It is too late. The veil is gone. The darkness is free. The sky above them twisted, the clouds swirling into a vortex of blackness. The ground trembled beneath their feet as the shadows grew thicker, more oppressive. Warren could feel it now, the full weight of the abyss pressing against him, suffocating him, threatening to pull him into its depths. We have to move, Warren shouted, his voice hoarse, desperate. We need to get out of here. But the path was already closing in on them. The trees were no longer just trees. They were twisted shapes, their branches reaching out like claws. The forest had become part of the darkness. The Watcher turned, its face hidden beneath its hood, as if it knew something Warren didn't. You cannot outrun what is already here, it said, its voice soft, but filled with finality. The darkness is here to stay, and now you must choose. Choose what? Hank demanded, his voice panicked. The Watcher looked at them for a long moment. You can join the darkness, become one with it, or you can fight. But if you choose to fight, it will consume you. It will take everything. Warren looked at Hank and Mike, their faces pale, their bodies trembling. They had come here with the hope of finding a way to stop the creatures, to protect the forest. But now, they were faced with something far worse than they could ever have imagined, and the clock was ticking. The tension was unbearable. The darkness surrounded them, growing stronger with each passing second. Warren could feel the pull of it, the weight of the ancient presence pushing against him, trying to drag him into its abyss. We have to fight, Warren said, his voice firm. though his body shook with fear. "We can't let it win." Mike and Hank exchanged a look, the fear in their eyes matching Warren's, but there was no turning back. The Watcher's words hung in the air, heavy with the truth. They could either join the darkness or face it, and they would fight. The Watcher stood aside, watching them, its expression unreadable. The darkness closed in on them, the very trees bending toward them like arms reaching out. The air thick with the power of an ancient, terrible force. But as Warren, Hank, and Mike stood together, their hands clenched in determination, they knew they had one chance left. One final stand against the forces that had been unleashed. Warren raised his hand, reaching deep within, summoning the light that had been buried within him for so long. It wasn't enough to stop the darkness, but it was all they had left. And with that, they fought. The darkness closed in like a living thing, swallowing the very air around them. Every breath Warren took felt heavier, as if the forest itself was draining the life from him. The trees loomed like twisted specters, their branches contorting toward him, reaching with unseen hands. The air hummed with an unnatural energy, as though reality itself was starting to bend and warp. Warren's pulse raced, his heart thudding in his chest. He could feel the darkness, an ancient force pressing against his very soul, as if it were trying to swallow him whole. He turned to Hank and Mike, their faces pale with terror, but also filled with determination. They had come too far to give up now. "We fight," Warren said, his voice steady, despite the fear clawing at him. "We fight because we have no other choice. This isn't just about us. It's about everyone." Hank nodded, gripping his flashlight tightly, the faint light flickering in his shaking hand. "We're not going down without a fight." Mike was silent, but the tension in his stance said everything. He was ready. They all were. The Watcher, standing motionless in the shadows, was the only thing between them and the abyss. Its glowing eyes pierced the darkness, but it didn't move, didn't intervene. The Watcher was waiting, watching them, as if it were merely an observer in this final moment. "You will join us in the end," the Watcher said, its voice calm, almost indifferent. "The darkness will claim you, just as it has claimed the others. It is inevitable." Warren's hand tightened around the energy that was building within him, the light that was slowly but steadily growing in his chest. He could feel it now, the power of the veil, the strength of the land itself. He wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting to protect everything, to stop the darkness from swallowing the world whole. "No," Warren said firmly, "I won't let it take us." The Watcher's lips twitched, a faint smile that didn't reach its eyes. "Very well. If you are so intent on your demise, then let it begin." With a single motion, the Watcher raised a hand, and the trees around them trembled. The forest groaned, its ancient roots shifting beneath their feet, and the ground cracked open with a deafening roar. From the depths of the earth, something stirred a massive, writhing force, darker than night itself, rising from the cracks in the soil. The creatures emerged from the darkness, their glowing eyes fixed on Warren, Hank, and Mike. They were twisted things, beasts of shadow and nightmare, their forms flickering between the real and the unreal, as if they were not fully bound to this world. The ground trembled again as the first of the creatures lunged forward, its long, gnarled claws reaching for Warren's throat. The air around them was thick with the stench of decay, the force of the creature's presence overwhelming. But Warren wasn't afraid. He couldn't afford to be. He released the energy. A wave of light erupted from his chest, a pure, blinding force that shot out in all directions, cutting through the darkness like a blade. The creatures recoiled, screeching in agony as the light burned away the shadows around them. But there were too many. They kept coming, their forms flickering in and out of existence, relentless in their pursuit. "Mike," Warren shouted. "Hank, stay close. We need to push through." The darkness responded with a roar, the creatures surging forward, but the light was pushing them back. For a moment, Warren thought they might be able to hold their ground, but he knew it wasn't enough. Not yet. The Watcher stepped forward, its form flickering like smoke, its eyes glowing with an almost amused intensity. "You are fighting a losing battle," it said, its voice deep, vibrating through the very air. "The darkness cannot be stopped. It is inevitable." Warren's breath came in ragged gasps, but his resolve remained unbroken. The energy within him was growing, but so was the pressure of the darkness. The Watcher's presence, its cold, detached gaze, seemed to siphon the strength from the light he was channeling. And then, he felt a tan, odd sense of power, a strange resonance that came from deep beneath the earth. It was as if the entire forest were alive with energy, ancient energy, waiting for the right moment to strike. "I can't do this alone," Warren muttered under his breath, the realization hitting him like a wave. "The veil. We need to reinforce it." Hank, still holding his flashlight, stepped forward. "We don't have much time. We fight together. We protect the world, Warren. We don't let this place fall." Mike, though pale, nodded grimly. "Whatever happens, we stick together." In that moment, Warren knew. They weren't fighting just for survival. They were fighting for everything they held dear, for every person who had ever walked through these woods. They weren't fighting alone. The forest, the land itself, had been waiting for someone to stand against the darkness. Warren closed his eyes for a moment, drawing deep from the energy that flowed through the earth. It was ancient, raw, untamed. He could feel the power of the forest, the power of the veil, alive within him. With every breath, he drew it in, focusing all of it into a single point. He wasn't just standing against the darkness. He was becoming the barrier, the line between light and shadow. "Now," Warren shouted, his voice filled with fierce determination. Together, the light that erupted from him this time was unlike anything before. It was a pure force, a searing energy that burned away the creatures, forcing them to retreat into the darkness from which they came. The trees around them shuddered with the intensity of the power, their roots stretching deep into the earth, anchoring the energy as it spread outward, pushing against the rift that had been torn in the veil. The Watcher raised its hands, but the energy was too strong. The veil was reforged, the cracks mending, the barrier rising once more between this world and the darkness beyond. But even as the creatures shrieked and the forest trembled, Warren knew that this was only temporary. The darkness would return. The veil would weaken again, and next time, they wouldn't be so lucky. The forest fell quiet. The creatures were gone, retreating into the shadows, but Warren felt no peace. The darkness had been pushed back, but it was far from defeated. The Watcher's words lingered in his mind, like an echo of a deeper truth. Warren, Hank, and Mike stood together, breathless, their faces pale but filled with grim determination. They had fought, and for now, they had won. But at what cost? Warren turned to face the Watcher, still standing in the clearing, its presence like a dark cloud hanging over them. "We did what we had to," Warren said, his voice low. "But what now?" The Watcher's eyes flickered, a strange expression crossing its face. "Now, you understand. The darkness is inevitable. It cannot be stopped, but you have chosen to fight. That choice is what makes you different. You will be the last to stand against it." Warren took a deep breath, the weight of the Watcher's words settling heavily on his shoulders. The battle was far from over. The darkness would return, and when it did, they would be ready. For now, though, they had time, but that time was running out. The woods were eerily quiet now, save for the occasional rustle of the wind through the trees. The Watcher, standing motionless in the clearing, seemed almost indifferent to the aftermath of the battle. Warren, Hank, and Mike remained silent, each of them trying to come to terms with the terrifying realization that the fight they had just survived was nothing more than the beginning. Warren's hands were still shaking, his chest rising and falling with each labored breath. But the light from his outburst, the surge of energy that had temporarily pushed back the darkness, was fading. It was as if the forest was exhaling, releasing the tension it had been holding for so long. But the sense of finality, of something inevitable and unstoppable, loomed heavy. "What now?" Mike finally asked, his voice small in the oppressive silence. His face was pale, drained of the fear he had once carried. "Is it really over?" "No," Warren said, his voice sharp, as though the truth cut deeper with each passing second. "The creatures are gone for now. The Watcher is still here, but the darkness, it's not gone. It's only dormant. And the veil, it won't hold forever." The Watcher's eyes flickered toward Warren, but it didn't respond immediately. It simply watched them, its gaze unreadable, like an ancient being whose patience had no limit. The figure exhaled a quiet sigh that sounded almost regretful, and then it spoke, its voice dark and full of weight. "You've bought yourselves some time, but the balance is always shifting. It is never steady, never secure. You will not escape what is coming." Warren clenched his fists, trying to steady his breath. "We'll fight. We'll protect this world, no matter what." The Watcher's eyes glowed faintly. "You cannot protect it forever, Warren. The world is not as you believe it to be. The creatures, the veil, the Watchers, all of it, is part of something much older than your understanding. The darkness cannot be contained. You have simply pushed it back for now, but the rift will widen again." "And what happens then?" Hank asked, his voice grim. The Watcher tilted its head slightly, as though considering the question. "When the darkness returns, and it will seek to undo everything. It will swallow the land, the creatures, the very light that you hold on to. And in the end, when the last Watcher falls, when the veil is gone, there will be no more worlds to save." Warren's chest tightened, his fists clenching harder. "There has to be a way. We can't just accept that." The Watcher stepped closer, its presence filling the clearing. The air grew colder, as though the night itself had turned against them. "The choice you make now, the path you choose, will determine everything. You have already begun the journey, but it is not for you to control. You are merely part of the cycle." A terrible, eerie calm settled over them as the Watcher stood in silence. The forest around them seemed to be waiting, holding its breath, as if the world itself was waiting for the next move. Every shadow in the trees, every flicker in the fog, felt like it was alive, like it was watching them. And then, the Watcher spoke once more, its voice resonating with the knowledge of ages. "You will fight. But the question is, how long will you last before the darkness consumes you?" Before Warren could respond, the Watcher's form began to dissolve into the fog, its body becoming translucent and fading into the night, as if it were a part of the forest itself. Warren stood in the clearing, his mind reeling. The Watcher's warning echoed in his head, a reminder of the inevitable doom that awaited them all. The weight of it pressed down on him, suffocating, making him feel smaller than he ever had before. The world felt fragile, the ground beneath him too soft, as though it could crumble away at any moment. Hank and Mike stood beside him, both staring into the woods, their expressions grim. "I don't understand," Mike said finally. "What did it mean? The darkness, it can't be real, right?" Warren shook his head, his mind spinning. "It's real. All of it. The creatures, the Watchers, the veil. The darkness is a force we can't even begin to comprehend. The Watcher, whatever it is, it made it clear that we've awakened something that we can't stop." Hank looked out into the distance, as if he could see the threat closing in. "Then what do we do? We can't just sit here and wait for it to destroy everything. We need to fight." "We will fight," Warren said, his voice firm. "We won't let the darkness take over, but it's going to take everything we have. We need to find the others, the remaining Watchers. Together, we stand a chance, but alone, we're just a speck in the darkness." Mike nodded, the weight of Warren's words sinking in. "So, what now?" "We keep moving," Warren said, his voice resolute. "We find the other watchers, learn what we can, and we make our stand. We won't let the darkness have this world without a fight." The forest was still. The air was thick with the sound of distant winds, but underneath it all, Warren could feel the creeping presence of the darkness, as though it was waiting for them to make their next move. They didn't have much time. The darkness was patient, and its reach was far. The only question that remained was how much longer they could keep running from it. Warren, Hank, and Mike ventured further into the wilderness, seeking the watchers, hoping for some glimmer of hope. But with each step they took, the world around them seemed to shift, becoming darker, more oppressive. The creatures never stopped watching them, never stopped hunting them, and the watchers, they remained elusive, their true purpose still a mystery. The darkness that had been locked away for so long was no longer just a whisper in the wind. It had become a presence of force, moving through the world, drawing closer with every passing moment. The veil was thinning, and as it did, the creatures stirred, and the watchers, the so-called guardians, remained silent. The battle was far from over. The fight had only just begun. The question remained, would they stand and fight, or would they be swallowed by the darkness? The end was coming, but it wasn't over yet.